Good afternoon, everyone. I think we are live in the webinar jam room. I'm Michael Avery, financial journalist, host of Classic Business on radio in Joburg and Cape Town, and anchor of the COVID-19 Business Watch Daily Show on Business Day TV. And for my sins, editor of a private equity magazine on the side too. I hope you've got your coffee and your notebook handy as we're set to deliver some rich insights during the next 60 minutes as we take a drive through the automotive industry and the impact of COVID-19 on OEMs, on dealers, and what all of this means for consumers too. How should the automotive industry readjust to a COVID-19 world, I think is the broad sort of catch-all for what we're going to be discussing over the next hour. Just briefly, I'd like to thank our partners on this journey, Mail and Guardian, under a new editor, Sipho Kings from today, who will no doubt be highlighting this trend that we see globally towards greener transport as an environmental journalist as well. I wish him well as he takes over the baton from Khadija Patel, who did a fantastic job at the Mail and Guardian. So Khadija, well done. We wish you well in whatever role you find yourself in the future. And thank you to sponsors ABSA, who are displaying typical Africanacity, I think you guys call it now, in the last few years, in these uncertain times, and for supporting fora like these to bring all the important stakeholders together to understand what the future holds. I think crystal ball gazing from the various programs that I host is increasingly important, but increasingly difficult. I think forecasting anything at this time is sometimes a bit of a fool's game. But with the motor industry, I think there is some line of sight emerging. We're seeing a lot of news around green deals and stimulus just today on the Bloomberg terminal. Big news about the German stimulus and the way they're going. So it promises to be a very interesting next 45 to 50 minutes or so after I'm finished talking. Now, just to mention some housekeeping rules. Thank you firstly for joining us. I see we're almost at 200 attendees so far. You're not going to have direct access to speak directly to presenters, but please type your comments and your questions into the chat box, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can during the time that we have. Presenters are going to be responding to a sort of Q&A type format that I'm going to be kicking off shortly. And we will be making a recording of this webinar available afterwards. So if you do miss anything, or if you find anything that was just absolutely absorbing and you want to go back and make notes, don't worry, it will be made available as a recording. Now, I thought just as a high-level scene setter, I would go through what we've seen around the world just quickly before I introduce our room to you today. And we've seen the global automotive industry, which was already in a little bit of trouble before COVID-19. There was the trade war issue and the Tangerine Man and his friends in China. And we had seen a trade deal, a phase one trade deal reached, and then there were environmental concerns as well, as the search for future motoring, among many other things, were already weighing on sales. And then COVID hit. And obviously, it's had a massive impact all over the world. We've seen sales at levels that nobody ever thought we'd ever see them in terms of fall off month on month. Just to have a look at the Chinese scenario, year on year, we saw some of the biggest ever vehicle sales that we've seen in China. I think 18.6% year on year in January. Then February got even worse. The biggest fall ever recorded in the time series, 79.1%. But then we have seen something of a recovery through April, and we continue to see that. So we look to China because that's obviously where the outbreak started. And we look to China for any signs of what the recovery might look like. In Europe, demand for vehicle sales fell sharply in March. EU light vehicle market contracting by 44% year on year. And over in the US, we saw new passenger and light truck sales plummet by 47.9% year on year in April. We know here the slump in South Africa, new vehicle sales slowed in May as we saw dealerships resuming some of their operations. But domestically, it's been an absolute nightmare. Domestic sales fell 68% last month. It does compare favorably, though, with the record drop of 98.4% in April, as really the teeth of the lockdown sunk into the South African economy. Now, these monthly declines obviously resemble something similar to what we saw in the 2008-2009 crisis, perhaps even worse than that. So the big question is, how will the automotive industry get out of this unprecedented crisis? and what sort of structural changes, if any, will we see? And just today, I had news in my inbox from Mete, which is a leading international manufacturer, distributor, and retailer of energy storage solutions of batteries and automotive components. And they've just announced a big deal with Ford Motor Company of South Africa. So there's obviously still some activity going on, some investment there, over 3,300 new employment opportunities generated, and just under R1 billion. So clearly there is life after COVID, but what would it look like? With that, let's welcome your webinar speakers today. Mike Mabasa currently serves as Chief Executive Officer at NAAMSA, transport economist and a journalist for your sins, Mike. I was not aware of that little part of your CV. You hide that very well. Journalist by training and an individual with considerable business experience in the aviation industry too. So transport really coursing through his veins. He currently serves as chairman of the Air Services Licensing Council, and a regulatory body that sits under the Department of Transport, which regulates domestic air services within the country, and has previously served as chairman of the Air Traffic Navigation Services, ATNS. So, Mike, you might be able to tell us about the future of the aviation industry as well. But really, thank you for joining us as we get your insights from NAAMSA and the OEMs. Also in the webinar room is Faisal Mkhize. He's currently ABSA Group's managing executive of ABSA Vehicle and Asset Finance, and very well known in the automotive industry. That's a role that Faisal took up after 3 years serving the bank as the managing executive of retail and business banking. We know there's been a big restructure inside ABSA and a lot more of an entrepreneurial focus. Faisal has worked with Barclays Bank Mozambique. He was MD for over 2 years there, and he served in a number of senior roles in the bank, including head of market leadership and change in ABSA Business Bank, and as regional executive of Private Bank in the northern region as well. And then lastly, Mark Demise, who is a national chairperson of the National Automobile Dealers Association. He's MD and shareholder of North Motor Group, and he's dealer council chairman of Honda Dealer Network. Mark certainly cut his teeth in the motor industry when he joined the Micor Motor Group as FD back in 2005. He's a CA, but really an entrepreneur through and through, not the grey shoes kind. So Mark, thanks so much for joining us, and really look forward to getting your insights about the motor industry. And as someone who's passionate about Formula One, I'm sure you're pleased that the calendar's back on track and we've got a few nice double headers in front of us. Now, with that, Mike, perhaps you could kick us off here. In fact, I believe you've just come from a very important meeting with the Transport Minister. I don't know if the vehicle industry was discussed, but the global automotive industry, as I said in my introduction, was battling its own demons before the coronavirus pandemic hit sales. The industry was in recession in 2019. There's this challenge of the move to ditch internal combustion engines, or so-called ICE engines, and because of the climate crisis, a lot of pressure to move over to electric vehicles. But even electric vehicle car sales fell, although not as sharply as conventional vehicle sales. Now we see countries like France, countries like Germany announcing plans to invest significant sums to rescue and resuscitate their auto industries. And a lot of that is attached to kind of green just transition deals as well. Now, last year there was also speculation that the world may have readied or reached peak car, or the point at which global demand for vehicles begins an inescapable decline because of things like Uber. So it really is an industry that has been buffeted by all of these different forces. What is your perspective on this?
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for the invitation, and it's very good to see you and to see my other colleagues also on the panel, and of course, welcome to more than 200 guests that we have on the line. Well, look, I think it's difficult times and very seriously uncharted territory and uncharted waters for all of us. Remember that the automotive industry is a global business. Currently in South Africa, we're hosting 7 global brands or 7 global manufacturers who are in South Africa, who are manufacturing these vehicles in our country. And many of them, in fact, they're not actually producing these vehicles for our local consumption only. 64% of what we're producing in the country currently goes out of the country because we have become a very strong export market. Now, what happens in other markets and other parts of the world obviously impacts very directly because our global supply chain is interlinked. So if China is unable to send us components, for an example, or France or Germany is unable to work, it has a very direct impact on South Africa and our ability and capacity to can be able to develop vehicles and manufacture them and continue to do business in the country. Similarly, in terms of our import business, because remember, we've got about 35 brands that we import into the country that we sell in South Africa. Similarly, if those countries where those vehicles are being manufactured are unable to produce those vehicles, effectively it means that South Africa will not be able to distribute and sell those vehicles into the country. So we are working in a very interlinked industry, and unfortunately, the nature of the pandemic that we are dealing with in terms of COVID-19 has impacted directly on all of us. And we've seen also many of our counterparts in other vehicle-producing countries indicating, obviously, that 2020 is going to be a very difficult year for them. South Africa is certainly not an exception. It is certainly going to be difficult for us. We are already engaging with government very, very strongly. You've mentioned France and other markets where they are beginning to engage government to see how government can be able to continue to support their own industries so that we can really be able to see how best we can weather the storm, particularly during this particular difficult time. So we are already engaging with our own government locally, and we will definitely be able to find ways so that we can see how best we can be able to make sure that we safeguard this very important industry, which is contributing almost close to 7% towards our GDP in the country.
I think it's a great scene setter, Mike. Thanks for that. And we'll come back to what you potentially are modeling as the short, medium, and long-term impacts for the industry. Mark, from your perspective, what impact has the state of disaster had on dealerships? For quite some time, you couldn't trade at all. We now in level 3 see that dealers are starting to open again. What has the impact been?
Yeah, the impact has been, to put it mildly, pretty devastating, Michael. The reality is that dealerships are not normal businesses. They're very, very asset intensive. They've got lots of debt, and they rely on a lot of sales in turn because of the heavy stock. It's not like a Steers, to put an example, where your stock are the burgers in the fridge and you move that off pretty quickly. So the reality is that from the beginning of the lockdown, we weren't allowed to trade, but yet you had all of your stock, all of your life, all of your expenses, all of your costs, all of your staff. So literally the whole industry just went into freeze, very similarly to the restaurant trade, etc., but with quite devastating effects. Obviously, staff and the fallout on the levels of staff has also been devastating because people couldn't get paid. There was a no work, no pay principle. Lots of dealers tried, however, to pay people, commissions owed and leave pay and salaries, etc. So that did help a bit. But the long extension of the lockdown was pretty devastating. Effectively only having to really be able to go back roughly in the middle of May. Fortunately, however, through NAAMSA and Mike's lobbying with government, which we helped him and tried to assist him on, we managed to get our workshops going a little bit sooner. And I think that was just not only vital for dealerships in South Africa, but just vital for our economy and effectively how mobile people need to be. The reality is that so many people drive cars in this country. Everybody takes a taxi to work or drives their own vehicle. And during the lockdown, there were a lot of services that were dependent on vehicles, like the food transport industry. The food had to get on trucks and had to go to Woolworths and Checkers and Pick and Pay, etc. The health industry. So all those essential services were still running, but yet we couldn't operate. So it was an extremely difficult time. Fortunately, we've come back now. And there is a bit of a path forward. Dealers have had to need support, though, support from manufacturers, the brand owners, who own the brands, and also the banks and their landlords. I mean, those three major critical areas have been critical to kind of stay alive and keep paying the bills.
Yeah, as we've seen, you've referenced the restaurants, but in so many other customer-facing industries and retail, that tripartite relationship between the landlords, the banks, and the businesses to try and find some way to work together to share the pain. Faisal, what has the impact of lockdown been on the vehicle finance industry?
Thanks, Michael, for the opportunity. I think the panelists have outlined, very clearly some of the impact that we've seen. From the banking side is that, if we look at the numbers, particularly the April numbers, have been very telling because what it means in practice is that our clients, the dealerships have not managed to move stock and there has been no sales activity in that front. And the impact obviously has been felt very strongly in the market. And secondly, I mean, if you look at the May numbers now, while there's been some slight improvement in terms of what we're seeing happening, it is very clear that the consumer is under pressure. And if I look at our base, for instance, if you look at the total clientele that we have in our base that have borrowings with us, 42% of them have asked for payment relief, a scheme that we've introduced to assist them for a period of 3 months at least to ease the cash flow so that they can be able to navigate the difficult times. So it is very clear that the pressure is out there and the consumers are feeling it. So these are some of the things that are coming out of the wash. And safe to say that obviously from a dealer point of view, we've also come up with some sort of mechanism to say how do we help the dealers, because we know that have not managed to move stock over this period through interest deferral, ensure that we are able to negotiate with them where there are payments that are due to help them navigate through this period as our partner so that when we get into the other side, we can make the right calls.
And we'll come back to the mechanisms that have been employed to support dealers through wholesale finance and some innovation that you've introduced there. Mike, I want to come back to you and that point that I left off on in terms of modeling what the impact is going to be on the South African industry as such a critical hub of the country's industrial programs over the last 2 decades and a big export earner as well. What do you see the impact over the short term, over the medium term, and then over the long term?
Well, look, Michael, we've already started working on our numbers for the outlook for the year. And remember, from the industry perspective, there are 4 key performance indicators that we chase. So the first one is production. Because South Africa is a huge production country in terms of vehicles, we want to be able to see whether our targets that we have set for ourselves at the beginning of the year will still be met. Because remember, we've got a program called the Automotive Development Program, the Automotive Development Program that we have with government, that helps us to be able to achieve certain targets that we set for ourselves. So production is going to be very critical to look at very, very closely. The second indicator is really around exports. I've mentioned earlier on that South Africa currently exports 64% of its production capacity out of the country, and we're currently trading with 151 different markets where we send these vehicles to. And then the third indicator is obviously importation. So because we bring in quite a huge volume of vehicles into the country, and we need to be able to track as well whether that has gone up or is going down or it's remaining flat as it were. And then of course the last indicator is our domestic vehicle sales, because that's very key for us to be able to stress test whether indeed the economy is still where it should be. Are people able to have enough disposable income so that they can be able to buy new vehicles or not? When we model all these numbers, it is becoming very clear that for 2020, we are actually beginning to look at a 25% decline across the 4 indicators that I've mentioned. So in terms of our production, in terms of our exports, we will certainly be able to go into a 25% decline compared to the previous corresponding period. And that's a huge number, Michael, because when we started the year pre-COVID-19, in terms of our outlook, we were anticipating around a 5% decline. That number has gone sharply down by a further 20%, which really shows you that this impact on COVID-19 will have a major impact for us as the industry for the balance of this year, certainly.
That's over the short term, shall we say. How quickly do you see the industry recovering such a steep drop? We are seeing in China, for example, quite a quick recovery from some of those disastrous numbers that we saw in January and February. Might it take a little bit longer here? What are you modeling?
Well, look, I think it will take us a little bit longer because remember, South Africa is currently under a recession. Buying a vehicle in South Africa, for many South Africans, particularly the middle class, is the second biggest investment for them. So people see vehicle, as a very important acquisition, in terms of their own personal balance sheets. And because we are currently in a recession, disposable income currently, it's not something that is very easy to come by. And a lot of households, a lot of people are still under pressure. Obviously, we welcome the announcements that were made recently by the Reserve Bank in terms of reducing interest rates. But certainly, we think that recovery is definitely going to be very, very slow in South Africa. We are also informed and also impacted directly by what happens globally. Because we're a global market, we trade with other partners. As I indicated, we sell to 151 different other countries and markets. We're also watching what's happening in those markets, particularly in Europe, so that we can really be able to see whether some of the export orders that we had secured, we will still be able to deliver this year, or there will obviously be a pushback in terms of making sure that those orders are actually slowed down. If you look at our tourism business, for example, one of our biggest customer in South Africa is our rental companies. And currently, as you know, the tourism industry is currently still not allowed to operate under level 3. It will take them much longer in order for them to be able to open up in full steam. And that obviously are some of the things that are actually slowing our capacity to can be able to say we'll be able to go back full steam as quickly as possible.
And internationally, we've seen what's happened to Hertz filing for bankruptcy. Notwithstanding that, its share price doing exceptionally well this week, but I don't want to divert too much from the main gist of the conversation. Roberto Sacuti has asked here, before I come to you, Mark, just to find out how this changing consumer buyer behavior is going to impact on dealers and how you respond. Roberto Sacuti in the chat room is asking, how much is the African market, Mike, here, the answer to the current crisis? And he says here that the current endeavors of the Association of African Automotive Manufacturers to create a pan-African business platform to try and stimulate what we're seeing. Mike, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Michael. Well, look, I think Africa, obviously, Africa is very important for us. And currently, we exporting about 11% of what we're producing in South Africa into the rest of Africa. We are very excited, obviously, by the fact that we now have an agreement, the intercontinental agreement that we've signed with the other 53 countries. And we are hoping, obviously, that post-COVID, we will certainly be in a position to gain traction in making sure that we're able to see some of the benefits that particular agreement can be able to bring for us. But as South Africa, we are not waiting and folding our arms. We have created, obviously, now AAAM, which is an association that we've mentioned, and we are collaborating now with many other markets in Africa, particularly regionally, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, so that we can really be able to see how best we can work with those countries, so that we can make sure that we are able to increase our capacity to make sure that Africa can be able to stand the test of time, and particularly because there's huge opportunity in the rest of the continent. Because if you look at countries like Ethiopia, where they've got 110 million people in that country, but if you look at their car park, they've got less than 250,000 vehicles in that car park. So there are massive opportunities because most of those countries also depend on what we call grey imports, which is second-hand vehicles. And we really want to be able to start energizing them to start looking at buying, brand new vehicles as opposed to relying on grey imports, which is, cars that are dumped by, other countries into the rest of the continent.
And understandably, a huge growth area and opportunity there. Chatting to Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, they've also had to delay some of their timelines. They were hoping to go live around June, and they've had to defer that. So it's been a case of hurry up and wait, I think, thanks to COVID-19. Mark, for the dealers now, you're back and you're trading again under level 3. The big challenge, I guess, is to understand this new consumer dynamic. What are customers wanting? Are they coming in because of stressed balance sheets to trade down. What are you seeing so far as the early indications of consumer behavior under level 3?
Yeah, it's a good question, Michael. I think overall we're seeing obviously workshop car park is in need of servicing and repair. So because of the lockdown, for various reasons, either you were at home or you were working, there's a big amount of car park that needs to be serviced. So there's a lot of engagement here, and the industry is relatively positive about the workshop stream this month. To have a full month of trade. So that's quite a nice positive. On the other side, on the sales side, we're seeing a little bit of resilience on the used car market and interest and a bit of hunger from the buying public there. However, the new car market is obviously still a little bit weak and sensitive at this stage. So, but there are a lot of reasons why people wanting to buy cars. I mean, a lot of consumers out there or people might be asking, well, who's buying cars right now? As you said, there are a lot of people that want to buy it down. There are a lot of people that want to restructure. And simply because of the mere fact that our only means of transport is a vehicle for most people in South Africa, the reality is that when these cars start becoming unreliable or will start costing money, the best way out of that old used car is to get yourself into a better, more reliable, newer car, etc. So there is that element where people are amazingly buying vehicles now. So the buying habits definitely are in the lower segment. And without a doubt, new is going to take some time. However, at this stage, with the rand depreciating, new car prices could price up to about 10% over the next quarter, just because of the depreciation of the rand, despite even coming back a bit for the last couple of days. So it's going to be a very interesting dynamic between the new market and the used market, in terms of that effectively there's a lot of cheap used cars out there in the market now. That effectively will become cheaper because of the big pricing pressure on new cars. And then also we've got these rental defleets coming out because the rental companies don't really have any business. They're going to be defleeted 70%. And those cars are going to represent a very, very good opportunity for the consumer buying public out there. They aren't going to be going into Uber, I can assure you, because those cars are still stay in Uber. But I can tell you right now, there's some very good rental cars coming back into the market, and combined with low interest rates, and hopefully a bit of stability and a bit of a comeback in our economy, we could have quite a good market there. We talk about the resilience. We're not going to have a V-shaped recovery. We're going to have something between a U and an L, hopefully a shorter U, not a wide U, but maybe something like that. But this month is critical. What the stats that are going to come out of South Africa this month on retail level, on sales, politically, hopefully we can have a nice politically stable environment as we keep reducing the lockdown, and our infection rates, etc., can be under control. We could come out of this stronger than we initially thought, and the buying pattern of consumers of vehicles will represent that too.
We hope it's not a funny square root shape that some economists are now talking about with a halfway up V that just flatlines towards the end of it. I just want to stay on the aftermarket side of the business here, because I do think, and you touch on a very important point there, perhaps as consumers take a wait and see approach as well, or trade down, there's a lot of activity in the used car market that will probably mean more service opportunity. And I just want to understand how COVID has impacted that. Are there bottlenecks in the supply chain for things like parts, for example? Many of those we do get from the East. What are you seeing as potential challenges in that market?
Now, I mean, Mike could also probably talk about this a bit later on the import side. I think on the vehicle side, we're okay in terms of stock. There's not really major supply disruptions there because of the high levels of forecast before pre-COVID. But on the parts side, on the slightly older car park, I think there could be a bit of a challenge. The priority for these factories that are making parts all over the world is to keep supplying the new park. And I think they could have a little bit, the new park is in 1- and 2-year-old, 3-year-old vehicles. I think your slightly older vehicles could run into a bit of a challenge. However, there's an aftermarket there. I must say, overall, I don't think we're seeing a drastic supply shortage of parts in South Africa. There will be your normal understandable supply issues, but I'm not really sensing anything that is turning into a crisis at this stage.
Oh, that's encouraging to hear. I want to field, before Faisal, we come to you to hear a little bit more about this financing package that you put together. Mark, I just want to say here, I've got a question from Prabith Kalithal, who's asking how dealers are dealing with the safety regulations at the workplace, especially with customer interactions. And you're obviously a very customer-facing business in the dealerships. And my concern has always been that as we exit under the levels, that we almost create a hyper-bureaucracy of health and safety, which, I mean, health and safety is absolutely necessary, but will we find the right balance between appropriate health and safety and allowing businesses to continue to conduct their business in a productive manner? What are you seeing on the shop floor?
I think, dealerships fortunately are very, very nice environments for screening of COVID-19 and protecting our customers. So for instance, if you take the typical car dealership, it's got a very low footfall, low traffic, and nice spacious environment. So we can manage we manage all of our customers at this stage by appointment only. And that's what you're doing anyway. When you phone to book your car in for a service, you phone, book an appointment. The service desk will give you an appointment slot. You'll then come and arrive at the dealership. Very simple. It was what you were doing anyway. It might just be at a slightly different time. We'll then screen you as you come in. We take your temperature. We write down your details, so you are, and you bring your vehicle in. You're not going to come into a packed service reception of 20 people in it. There'll be 2, 3, or 4, all socially distanced and all very well managed. And that is very well taken care of. Your vehicle then gets dropped off. You can either choose whether it works to stay or you can go. A lot of dealerships are even lifting people home, one in a car or in a very big car, potentially 2. But once again, we've got very, very comprehensive screening and health and safety measures that we've sat and negotiated with government way back. Mike was heading that with the Department of Trade and Industry, and it was signed off by everybody. So we've actually been ready for this for some time now. And quite frankly, the last 3 weeks of retail workshop, we really haven't had a problem. I think general public out there, everyone's got their place to sit and be very comfortable in a dealership. So the same thing goes for new vehicle sales. Most of it can be done online now. Anyway, it was actually all being done online beforehand. So there's very little and you're going to want to do in a dealership except see the physical vehicle. You'll probably want to touch and feel it, and maybe you want to test drive it as well or see your physical goods, and that's no different to beforehand. But dealerships are very, very well suited for this environment, and it's not too bureaucratic. I think the high traffic environments like shopping centers and those sorts of things are a far bigger challenge than what we have.
And we'll come back to the digital and virtual showroom trend, which I think is only going to accelerate thanks to COVID-19. As you say, it was one of those trends that was in effect there before COVID-19, COVID being the accelerant on that particular trend. Faisal, how have dealers on wholesale finance been supported during this period of lockdown? Did they qualify for relief efforts, and how many applications have you received in this regard? Oh, Faisal, if you can just unmute yourself there, please.
Is it better now?
There we go.
Yeah. So there are a number of interventions. Thanks, Michael. There are a number of interventions that we've rolled out into the market, particularly for the dealership. One is that, obviously, as I indicated earlier on, that for floor plans, which is the working capital type of instrument they use to stock the vehicles, we've come up with some sort of interest deferral mechanisms to ensure that the dealers can continue to ease back into the market. And secondly, where there are restructuring that are required over and above that, we've got a number of programs that we've rolled out through our own initiative of giving opportunities to the clients, particularly the dealership, and people in the motor trade to apply for other payment relief mechanisms for a period. And just in our base between the vehicle sector and some of our business clients, we've rolled out in excess of about 5 billion of rands in terms of relief measures for the period. And we continue to see some application flowing into the base. So it does tell you that there's big need that is out there, and we remain very available to support our clients in terms of this period. But what is also interesting is that through the South African Reserve Bank COVID-19 guaranteed scheme, we've seen some applications that are coming through in terms of that instrument that government has rolled out. We've, in fact, in that area, we've funded in excess of about 60% of the applicants that are coming through that are meeting the requirements. So there are a number of instruments that are there that we are using to support clients that are coming through into our base. But what is most important is that even prior to some of these guaranteed schemes that we're seeing from government, as a bank, we've been very proactive to good standing clients, saying if they need help, we are available and have been responding. And I must say that the take-up in terms of some of those initiatives have been very good. Thanks.
There's one question here from the chat room, Mike, before we come back to you on what government plans are with regards to supporting the industry. Just staying on the retail side for a little bit, not talking dealers here, but this question is from Mr. Zar. What plans, if any, Faisal, are there to make finance more accessible to retail customers in the rest of the continent?
Obviously, I mean, when we do the business that we do, we separated our business from South African business and Africa business. And there are a lot of plans that are currently in place that have been driven by our corporate and investment business that takes care of the Africa region. And they work with OEMs in solving for some of the needs there. And I'm happy to engage and maybe a little bit of further details in case required in terms of what they do there. But I know that we work very well with them in terms of solving either from a parent company type of requirements or from a local type of manufacturers that are currently operating in South Africa who have interest in the continent, and the engagements have been also very good in that area.
Mike, I want to come back to this issue of support by government, and it actually dovetails with a question here from Joaquim Rodriguez, who says there's a long delay on the payments from customers because of COVID-19. So is there any strategy from government side to support dealers because of that? But I want to expand on that even further, because the expansion of our manufacturing industry, of our manufacturing and industrial base is linked really to the automotive industry in a very direct way. And it's been part of government's economic development strategy for decades now. The big concern is that it could push many of the ambitious growth plans out of reach for the automotive sector. And you said earlier, 25% decrease in 1 year is absolutely massive. Some industry officials have been quoted saying that government needs to defer some tax payments for the motor industry, perhaps relax the criteria for investment incentives and allowances, or we could see a real permanent structural blow to the automotive sector. Does the industry require further government support at this stage? And if so, how would you like to see that support structured?
Well, look, thanks, Michael. We have already engaged government in relation to the support that we need as the industry. And certainly one of those that we've asked for is the one that is really going to help us and the companies that we have in the country to manage their liquidity. Because obviously the challenges that we have that have been brought about by COVID-19 suggest that there is obviously a huge liquidity challenge in the market, particularly for the small players that we have within the value chain. The deferral definitely is one strategy that we're looking at, because we're not going to ask for government to give us bailouts like they are doing with SAA or ESCOM and other SOEs. What we've asked for really is to get deferrals so that we can be able to get an opportunity to can restructure specifically our current working capital and make sure that our companies are duty bound to be able to meet at least the immediate commitments in relation to what they need to do at this particular time. Remember also, Michael, that the auto industry already is heavily supported by government, and we are very grateful that South Africa has taken a decision to support the automotive industry in a very, very big way. And this is not necessarily unique to South Africa. Many other vehicle-producing markets and countries are supporting their auto sectors, because if you do not have government support, what you are going to have is markets like, for example, Australia, where they've actually lost their auto sector primarily because when the government withdrew its support of that sector, we saw the collapse of the entire value chain in Australia. And currently, as we speak, Australia is hugely dependent only on imports of vehicles in that particular country. It's no longer a vehicle producing market. So we have the necessary support. We will continue to engage government so that we can be able to see how best we can save, particularly those markets that are struggling. We've also reached out to also other sectors and also other financiers. We are in conversation, for example, with the IFC in the coming weeks, so that we can really be able to see, because there are products already that they have developed, as well as the International Finance Corporation, to see where we can be able to deploy some of those financial products into the market to be able to assist, particularly our struggling, companies in the market to be able to get out of the situation that they find themselves in.
Mm. Is this an opportunity? And I saw in today's Bloomberg terminal the breaking news around Germany's stimulus package for their auto industry, and a major component of it is linked towards a push on the electric vehicle side. So no subsidies for any fossil fuel based type, old ICE type vehicles, and lots of subsidies now coming in for electric vehicles, or the electric drivetrain vehicle. I think NAMSA has realized that this is the future. Do you see this as a potential opportunity here to further accelerate that? What kind of conversations are you having with government in terms of ensuring we make South Africa a manufacturing hub for these vehicles, which quite clearly are going to be the future?
Absolutely. In fact, as we speak, Michael, we actually commissioned a report, which was, we are concluding that particular report now, which is conducted by TIPS, and it's a collaborative effort between NAMSA and the DTI, which is obviously a government department, so that we can be able to look at the electrification of vehicles in South Africa. And we're looking at a number of aspects in that particular position document, so that we can really be able to be clear in relation to how South Africa is going to respond to the whole evolution of electric vehicles. So we're looking at mainly 4 to 5 things. The first one is obviously production. Whether South Africa, are we going to be creating our own capacity in South Africa to be able to produce our own vehicles in the country, or are we going to be doing it, and importing vehicles from other markets or not? We're also going to be looking at how do we stimulate demand for electric vehicles, because currently the demand is very, very low, and we need to be able to make sure that we educate people and show them the benefits for why electric vehicles are the future, into the future of the automotive sector. Environmental issues obviously come into being as well, to say what are the benefits for us as a country if we go electric, and obviously issues around technology, innovation, and most importantly, infrastructure. Because currently we've got about 4 brands in the market, and most of those particular brands, in terms of their charging facilities, they're not integrated. And we need to be able to find a way to make sure that all those vehicles, as they come into the country, we're able to have a seamless charging network that can help us to be able to make sure that we're able to deliver a seamless electric vehicle ecosystem across the country. Our CEO Council, which is all the CEOs of all the major brands in the country, are actually coming together on the 24th of this month. And one of the issues which is on the agenda for this meeting is precisely the electric vehicle conversation. And we will be presenting, amongst other things, some of the findings that we have on this position paper, so that we can then be able to see how best we can be able to take that particular conversation forward. So that conversation is definitely front and center currently in our conversations, and we will certainly be making public statements, hopefully, once that position paper is made public.
Very interesting, and obviously lots of potential to lead the way globally in terms of green vehicle manufacturing, if we pursue it correctly with the right policy support and environment, and from the buy-in from the industry as well. Back to the dealer side of things, Mark, and you mentioned digitization. There's a comment here from Chris Jordan saying that digitization isn't new. We've had very high digital footprints. What will be interesting will be the balance between bricks and clicks now, thanks to COVID-19. Dealerships quite clearly are not going to disappear. I think people still want to go and kick the tires. They want to go and test drive vehicles. They want the experience. But part of that experience now is online, customizing, doing all of those things before you make the booking. How are you seeing COVID-19 shift this?
That's a good question. And to your point, especially about people wanting to go kick the tires, unfortunately, we are social beings. We want to get out and go shop. We want to go touch things, feel things. We're not going to be doing things all in our home, staring at a computer screen. So there is this need that the human being wants to do and go and shop. And like, in Mike says, when you're buying the second biggest investment of your life, and some people the biggest investment of their life, you're buying other many cars. You want to see your goods. So and not only that, there's quite a lot of interaction that has to happen, not just of buying the vehicle. When you buy a vehicle, there's a finance decision. There's non-paper products that you buy. There's accessories. There's all of these things, and I think the experience is quite all-encompassing. That said, as dealers go forward now, I think the dealerships in South Africa and around the world are really well equipped to handle that, because the reality is there's always touch points with purchasing of a vehicle. When you purchase a vehicle, you're going to have to service your vehicle. It forces you to go back and back and back again. And so your dealerships, the future, is going to be around the workshop and trying to create as much of a seamless and easy experience as possible, and not one of sort of going to the dentist, but rather one of going to have a nice, easy, happy retail experience. And I think the winners there will be the people that make people's life easy and not difficult. I think the whole haggling thing has always been the thing in the past, haggling for discount. And I think that will get sorted out over time with things like the agency model. But I think dealerships without a doubt are here to stay. I mean, so there were some of these articles online during the lockdown that dealerships were going to be wiped off the chessboard forever. We don't need them. Some people might not have the most favorite view of dealerships, but they really are an integral part of the economy. They're an integral part of communities. And you can just see what any dealership's creditors listing is like. Besides buying the cars and the parts and the manufacturer, it's SME, small men businesses, small businesses. They support a huge amount of communities as well. So, and I think it's a very clever, good model and can work. But we have got challenges going forward.
I just want to talk to the point around stock in the South African market on the back of what you said around defleeting. You said that means we're going to see a flood of stock of sort of 1 to 2 year old cars entering the market. What kind of pricing pressure do you see that having on the market in general?
That's a very good question at the moment. Remember that these will have a pricing effect on those very specific models, but rental cars are very specific models. And the used car is a commodity. If you have a 5-year-old car with 20,000 kilometers on it, and exactly the same car with 100,000 kilometers, there is a different price point. So what you have to remember that all used cars are unique. And the fact is that these defleets of the rental cars coming back to the market will come back at a better price had that they not come back in these kinds of numbers. So there will be an effect. What will that effect be? We'll only know from the take-up and also the rate of defleet by the rental companies themselves. If they defleet too quickly, the prices will sink very fastly on those cars. But I don't think they're going to have an effect on the non-rental aspect of similar priced cars and even slightly differently spec cars of even similar model. So, at the end of the day, a rental car is a bit of a different animal to the non-rental. But at the same time, what is better than to buy an ex-rental car? It's exceptionally well maintained, because think about it, that car has to be clean, it has to be neat, it has to be not have scratches on it, it has to smell nice, and it has to be maintained. It always has to have good tires on it, etc. So it's actually a very good commodity in itself. And if the market is in trouble and is having a lot of buy down, I think the jury's out as to how badly depreciating these cars will be. I think there will be take up, and once those cars are gone, we might even have a shortage of cars in the market. So I'm looking at that whole defleet exercise as a good opportunity for consumers, a good opportunity potentially for the banks. Faisal, maybe you're probably looking at very nice packages at the levels of under sub 200,000 rand, between sort of 30 to 200,000 rand market, and then cheap interest rates. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity for more South Africans to get mobile in a 1 to 2 year old car. What better? It's still got warranty, it's got service plan. I think it's a great buying opportunity.
Yeah, potential catalyst to reignite the industry post-COVID. Faisal, on that note, what are the trends in the forecast for vehicle financing for the remainder of 2020? We've had significant interest rate cuts, taking our prime rate back to levels last seen in the time of sunshine and Chevrolets, I think was the 70s slogan. And when the dust settles on COVID, the consumer is going to be faced with certainly a much more favorable buyer's market.
Absolutely. So we remain very positive around the outlook of the vehicle sector because, while there's going to be like a bit of shaving in terms of numbers that we've seen in the previous years, the momentum that we're seeing starting even in the month of June is going to be a good baseline to look at, to saying what are the trends that are going to be looking like. I think the pressure is going to be there, but to Mark's point, the dealerships are going to be here to stay, and the consumer is always going to be looking for some best deals that are going to be available in the market. And then obviously, given all the developments that are taking place currently, we think that things are going to bounce back, but not at the same level of 2019. It might take 2 years or so, but we remain very positive about the future and also the market bouncing back. And one thing I just wanted to mention is that at the core of our strategy as a bank is that we don't just focus at end user finance type of opportunities when we're looking at vehicle sector. We look at the total ecosystem. We are very much keen in terms of ensuring that the dealerships are staying strong and are able to navigate the crisis. We work with them and find solutions because our principles of our strategy is that we want to be the bank of choice for the dealer network. What it means in our investment choices, in our innovation choices, and in the systems that we roll out in the market, at the core of it, we want to make sure that it meets and serves the needs of the dealer. So we're very optimistic about us bouncing back, and and obviously the market bouncing back is not going to be at the same levels like we've used to know it. But I think opportunities are still going to be there, and we want to be with be there with the dealers when these things happen, when the market does bounce back.
One thing you didn't touch on, Faisal, is that rental and fleet market. What sort of approaches are you seeing? Does it dovetail with this expectation of a rapid defleeting? What are you actually seeing amongst your customers?
I think time is going to tell on this one, but I think one good positive things that I think can come out of it is that we're going to have a reasonably fair, good quality of stock coming back into the market in terms of used vehicles. And obviously, if there are limitations in terms of used cars, people are going to have options of good quality vehicles that are available out there, as one of the options. So I think that is good. And obviously, particularly to the point that Mark did make, to saying there's always going to be an opportunity for some people that are wanting to just to downgrade in terms of vehicles because of financial pressures and cash flow. And this defleeting is also just going to give additional opportunity for people to explore over and above what we see that is out there.
Mm. I want to come back, Mark, to you. Got a question from Gary McCraw here, and I think a very, very important, a very good question. We see licensing and testing stations not fully operational yet, and obviously that's having an impact on the finalization of vehicle sales transactions. What kind of impact? Is it material?
Yeah, it is material. And the reality is that on a used car, when a dealership buys a car from someone, a used car, they are expected by law to dealer stock it, which means stock it in its own name before they sell it on. And without a test center, you can't do that unless you roadworthy a vehicle. So the test centers are not all operating completely around the country. Some of them have been prohibited, but they're also the licensing centers. KZN, they haven't opened yet. And around the world and around the country, as of Wednesday, about 72% of these places hadn't been opened yet, and deferring on the basis of not having enough health and safety protocols in place and not enough PPE. Mike, however, has been intricately involved in speaking to the minister about that. So I think that he was chatting to earlier, and hopefully we're making progress on that. But it does have a serious effect. So we've had to, as dealers, we had to bob and weave and induce things within the bounds of the protocols that we've been giving in terms of license extensions, past expiry, etc., etc. But it has been very, very tough, and it makes a big difference. So, I mean, those were gazetted to be up and running by the 1st of June. I don't really feel it's acceptable that they're not open yet. They've had more than enough time to get ready. So yeah, I mean, they should be ready and going.
Yeah, and I think, Mike, to come back to you as we reach the last few minutes of this webinar, the time is absolutely zoomed past. I'm sure you put a lot of Zoom miles in these various government meetings that you've had over the last couple of months, but it shows you how interconnected an economy is. It's very difficult to just manage from the center and say, well, we'll switch that on, switch that off, and everything has an impact. A question here from Irma Fenter. If we see a 25% drop in terms of sales, production, exports, that'll probably lead to job losses. What's the expectation here, especially since government aid through the automotive industry support programs are tied to employment?
Yeah, look, I think job losses obviously are definitely inevitable. I think obviously when you lose a quarter of your production capacity, without doubt, obviously there would be casualties. And we are assessing, that particular situation currently to say, what does this mean? And the automotive industry is actually a value chain. It's a chain. And if one chain does not work well, the entire chain is not strong. So, I mean, the point that Mark raised, for an example now, in relation to registration and licensing of our centers, that has unfortunately an impact also on production. So if we don't get those registration and licensing centers going and doing what they're supposed to be doing, unfortunately, it has an impact on the entire value chain. I can tell you now that in terms of our components manufacturing also, there has already been indication that a lot of those companies are already battling quite significantly. And we are assessing, obviously, all these particular things during the course of the month to be able to see what impact it will have, obviously, in the next coming few months. We've just obviously entered level 3 now, where we were only allowed now under level 3 to ramp up to 100% of employment. And we are now assessing, obviously, what the impact is going to be in the next couple of weeks going forward.
And I think a very important comment as well here from Gary McCraw again, saying that if we're supporting the automotive industry, surely we should be supporting the entire value chain. And Mark, to your point about dealerships here, the retail sector of the automotive industry really should get some kind of support from government at this stage. You've got about a minute and a half left as a concluding remark. Where to from here for the industry? Clearly, the dealers are not going anywhere, but where do you expect to see the industry in 12 months' time?
I think if we can get out to somewhere near 80-90% of where we were pre-COVID-19, I think we'll be doing exceptionally well. I think we need as much support as possible. The government's done what they can. The interest rates can continue to come down, and we can have political stability, proper political stability. And there's some other countries that are going through a bit of a rough time. We can keep things quiet, and if government and the DTIC can play their part to a smooth transition down to level 1, we might have a chance of getting somewhere.
And have some certainty and not lockdown lawfare, as we've had this week in particular with 2 court cases going against the government. Faisal, what are your concluding remarks?
My concluding thoughts is that I think if comparatively speaking, I think we are looking at about 80% in terms of focus this year versus last year. And secondly is that we have to continuously work together with all the partners and parties to make sure that we keep the industry strong and we find a solution collectively to help some of our clients out there to keep the jobs that they have. So that's our commitment going forward as we navigate the crisis. Thanks.
Well, Mike, I was going to give you one last comment. If you can keep it under 60 seconds, the floor is yours, and then we've got to wrap it up because we've reached the end of our time.
Let me keep it under 45 seconds, Michael. Thank you very much. Well, look, I think the industry is playing a very significant role. As I indicated earlier on, we're contributing 7% to the GDP. We're currently employing more than 120,000 people in this country in the manufacturing space. If you look at our entire value chain, we're looking at more than 500,000 people that we employ. It's very, very critical for us to be able to work closer with government and many other stakeholders so that we can be able to save every single job that we have in the industry so that we can really be able to make sure that South Africa, when it comes out of COVID, it's better off than it was when it went in.
Well, there we have it, folks. Mike Mabasa, Executive Director and CEO of the National Automobile Association of South Africa. NAAMSA, thank you very much for joining us. Mark Demise, Chair of the National Automobile Dealers Association, and Faisal Mkhize, ABSA Group's Managing Executive for Vehicle and Asset Finance. A fascinating tour through the impacts of COVID-19 on the automotive industry and some great thoughts and insights into where we go from here. Quite clearly, government needs to ensure that it gets its regulatory house in order to allow the dealers to continue selling with those testing stations being open and licensing centres. We've left a lot on the table in terms of questions in the chat room. So we're going to have to chat to ABSA and the Mail and Guardian about hosting another one of these sessions in the not too distant future. From me, Michael, happy motoring, folks. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.